Here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to tell you at the dinner table, the jagged little pill that gets stuck in your throat when you look at your bank account at 3 in the morning. Stop saving money. That is not a slip of the tongue. It is not a reckless invitation to burn your paycheck on impulsive vacations or luxury cars you do not need. It is, however, the most critical pivot you will ever make in your financial life. We have been raised on a steady diet of Depression-era wisdom that tells us to hoard, to stash, to hide our resources under the mattress of a low-interest savings account, believing that if we just squeeze the coins hard enough, they will somehow multiply. But here is the paradox, the cruel irony of modern economics. The harder you try to save from a place of fear, the faster the money seems to slip through your fingers like dry sand. You are about to meet a man named Elias, and in his struggle, you are going to see a reflection of the very trap that keeps millions of hard-working Americans in a state of perpetual, exhausting mediocrity. This is not a story about getting rich quick. It is a story about the architecture of your own mind and why building a fortress around your wallet is actually the quickest way to suffocate your future. Elias Thorne lived in a drafty, two-story colonial in the suburbs of Ohio, the kind of house that looked charming from the street but groaned under the weight of deferred maintenance the moment you stepped inside. Elias was a good man. He was a disciplined man. He was the kind of guy who knew the price of milk at 3 different grocery stores and would drive an extra 4 miles to save 12 cents on a gallon of gas. He viewed his life through the lens of a spreadsheet. Every expense was an enemy to be vanquished. Every pleasure was a potential leak in the hull of his ship. He worked as a mid-level logistics coordinator, a job that required him to optimize routes and cut costs, a skill set he brought home with a vengeance. The air inside Elias's home was always a little too cold in the winter and a little too hot in the summer. He kept the thermostat locked at 62 degrees from November to March, wearing 2 sweaters and thick wool socks to avoid giving the gas company an extra dime. He called this fiscal responsibility. His wife, Sarah, called it living in a refrigerator, but she loved him, so she put on the extra layers and drank tea to keep warm. Elias believed that he was building a wall of security. He believed that every dollar he didn't spend was a brick in that wall. He denied himself the morning coffee, the new boots to replace the ones with the wearing soles, the occasional night out with friends. He operated under the grim philosophy that if he could just shrink his life down to the barest of essentials, nothing could ever hurt him. But the universe has a funny way of testing the structural integrity of walls built out of fear. It was a Tuesday in late January, the kind of bitter, gray day where the sky looks like a bruised sheet of metal. Elias came home to the sound of rushing water. It wasn't the gentle trickle of a brook. It was the aggressive, hissing spray of a pipe that had burst in the basement. He rushed down the stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs, to find 3 inches of freezing water pooling around the furnace. The very furnace he had refused to service for 5 years because the technician charged $150 for a checkup. He stood there in the icy sludge, watching the water rise, and the math began to race through his head. The emergency plumber would cost triple the normal rate because it was after hours. The water damage to the drywall, the potential mold, and the furnace, the ancient, unmaintained beast, was silent, dead in the water. In that single, chaotic hour, the savings of 5 years of skipped maintenance were wiped out, swallowed whole by the disaster. But the tragedy wasn't just the money. It was the crushing realization that hit Elias as he sat on the basement stairs, head in his hands, waiting for the plumber. He had spent years being miserable, being cold, denying himself and his family comfort, all to prepare for a rainy day. And when the rainy day came, it cost him more than if he had simply lived normally. The strategy of contraction, of shrinking, of defensive living had failed. He was exhausted. He was broke. And he was still cold. 4 weeks after the basement incident, Elias walked around in a fog of resentment. He felt betrayed by the system. He had done everything right, hadn't he? He hadn't bought lattes. He hadn't bought the new iPhone. Why was he losing? It was during this period of sullen introspection that he found himself standing at the fence line of his backyard, watching his neighbor, an elderly man named Silas. Silas was an enigma in the neighborhood. He was retired, drove a truck that was old but immaculately maintained, and always seemed to have time. He wasn't flashy, yet there was an air of abundance around him. His garden was lush, his house was freshly painted, and he hosted barbecues where the food never seemed to run out. Elias watched as Silas worked on a small irrigation system for his vegetable patch. It wasn't a necessary task. It was winter, after all, but Silas was tinkering, preparing, improving. "Looks like a lot of work for a garden that's under snow," Elias called out, his voice thick with the cynicism of the defeated. Silas straightened up, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in a way that suggested he knew a joke Elias hadn't heard yet. "Ideally, you dig the channels before the rain comes, Elias. That way, the water goes where you want it to grow corn, instead of flooding your basement." The comment stung. It was too close to home. Elias walked over to the fence, leaning against the damp wood. "I saved," Elias said, the words spilling out like a confession. "I saved every penny. I cut every corner. And I still got wiped out. It feels like the harder I grip the money, the more slippery it gets." Silas nodded slowly, leaning on his shovel. "That's because you're treating money like a brick, son. You're trying to stack it to build a wall. But money isn't a brick. Money is water. It's a current. That's why we call it currency." Elias frowned. "That sounds like philosophical mumbo-jumbo. If I don't hold on to it, it goes away." "No," Silas corrected gently but firmly. "If you hold on to water, if you trap it in a pond and never let it move, what happens? It stagnates. It grows algae. It breeds mosquitoes. It becomes toxic. You've been damming up your life, Elias. You've been so afraid of the drought that you stop the flow. And when you stop the flow, the pressure builds up until the dam bursts. That burst pipe? That wasn't bad luck. That was the physical manifestation of a neglected system. You were so busy saving the cost of the checkup that you paid the price of the catastrophe." He pointed to the irrigation trenches he was digging. "I don't save water. I channel it. I invest it into the soil so it brings me tomatoes in July. I spend money on maintenance so my truck runs for 20 years. I spend money on good food so I don't pay the doctor later. You are playing defense, trying not to lose. I am playing offense, trying to grow. There is a world of difference between being cheap and being fruitful." That conversation planted a seed in Elias's mind that was more stubborn than a weed. The image of the stagnant pond versus the flowing river haunted him. He realized his entire financial identity was built on anxiety. He was operating from a scarcity mindset, the belief that there is a finite amount of pie and he had to hide his slice before someone took it. Silas was operating from an abundance mindset, the belief that if you plant the seeds from your slice, you can grow a whole new orchard. The transition didn't happen overnight. It began with what could be called the rebellion of small steps. The old Elias would have spent his Saturday morning driving to 3 different hardware stores to find the cheapest possible replacement filter for his lawnmower, wasting 2 hours and $3 of gas to save 50 cents. The new Elias, trembling with internal resistance, went to the local shop, paid full price for a high-quality part, and asked the owner for advice on how to install it properly. It felt physically painful. Handing over the extra money made his stomach tighten. But a strange thing happened. The shop owner, appreciating the business and the conversation, gave him a tip on a fuel additive that would extend the engine's life. Elias went home, fixed the mower in 20 minutes, and used the saved time to read a book on logistics management he had been eyeing for months. A book the old Elias would have considered a waste of money because the library didn't have it. That book contained a concept about supply chain efficiency that Elias pitched to his boss the following Monday. His boss, usually dismissive of Elias's penny-pinching suggestions, was intrigued by this new, growth-oriented idea. It wasn't about cutting coffee in the break room. It was about optimizing the fleet to deliver more faster. Elias began to apply this flow philosophy to other areas. He stopped buying the cheapest work boots from the discount rack, the ones that hurt his feet and fell apart every 6 months. He bought a pair of high-quality, leather boots that cost 4 times as much. It felt like a sin, but his back stopped hurting. His energy at the end of the day improved. He wasn't coming home exhausted and irritable. Because he wasn't irritable, he had the patience to help his daughter with her math homework. His daughter's grades improved, and she stopped needing a tutor. The flow continued. He looked at his finances not as a vault to be locked, but as a garden to be watered. He took 5% of his savings, money he would have previously guarded with his life, and invested it in a certification course for advanced supply chain analytics. The old Elias would have screamed at the risk. What if I fail? What if it doesn't pay off? That's $2,000 gone. The new Elias saw it as digging an irrigation trench. He was directing resources toward future growth. The shift in his psychology was profound. When you are cheap, you tell yourself, I can't afford this. You reinforce your own poverty. You train your brain to look for limitations. When you invest, even in small things like good food or education, you tell yourself, I am worth this. I am capable of growth. You train your brain to look for opportunities. 6 months later, the company announced a restructuring. The old Elias would have been paralyzed with fear, terrified of losing his paycheck, frantically cutting the thermostat to 55 degrees. But the new Elias, armed with his certification and his recent successful project, didn't shrink. He stepped up. He applied for the new regional manager position. He walked into the interview not with the desperate stench of a man who needs to survive, but with the confidence of a man who knows how to build value. He got the job. The raise was significant, but the money was almost secondary to the realization of how he had achieved it. He hadn't achieved it by saving. He had achieved it by spending time, spending energy, and yes, spending money in the right places. As the years went on, Elias's life expanded. He fixed the house, not just to patch leaks, but to improve its value. He took Sarah on vacations, not to escape their life, but to enrich their connection, which in turn gave him the emotional stability to take bigger risks at work. The neighbors noticed the change. Elias didn't look like a man carrying the weight of the world anymore. He looked like Silas. He looked like a man who understood the river. The community began to treat him differently. When you operate from scarcity, you repel people. Nobody wants to be around a miser who counts every fry on the plate. But when you operate from abundance, when you are generous with your time and resources, you attract opportunities. People brought him deals. They introduced him to partners. His network grew, and his net worth followed. Not because he was hoarding, but because he was circulating. This brings us to the philosophy of true security. We are taught that security is a number. If I have $1 million in the bank, I am safe. But that is a lie. Inflation is the thief that picks the lock of that vault every single night. If your money is sitting still, it is dying. True security is not a pile of gold. It is the ability to generate gold. It is the capacity to solve problems. It is the network of relationships you have nurtured. It is the health of your body and the sharpness of your mind. Elias learned that there are 3 pillars to this new way of thinking. First, self-investment is the highest yield asset. The return on investment for a book, a course, or a healthy meal is infinite compared to the 0.5% interest in a savings account. Second, value flows to value. You cannot get rich by providing the bare minimum. You have to be the person who brings the most to the table, and that requires resources. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And third, fear is the most expensive luxury. The cost of missed opportunities, of stagnation, of poor health caused by stress and cheap food is far higher than the price of living well. The paradox is complete. By trying less hard to save in the traditional, painful sense, and trying harder to build, Elias ended up with more savings than he ever had when he was counting pennies in the dark. He realized that money is like a seed. If you keep it in your pocket, it remains a seed forever, until it eventually rots. If you throw it into the ground, if you let it go, it disappears for a while. That is the scary part. That is the moment of faith. But if you have prepared the soil, it comes back. It comes back as a stalk, then an ear of corn, then a harvest. So, here we stand, at the edge of your own decision. You have a choice to make tonight. You can go back to your ledger, turn down the heat, and worry about the price of eggs. You can continue to build your wall, brick by fear-soaked brick, hoping it keeps the world out. Or, you can put down the trowel and pick up a shovel. You can stop building walls and start digging trenches. This is a call to action, not for your wallet, but for your soul. Look at your bank statement. Where are you spending out of fear, and where are you spending out of growth? Stop hoarding the water. Let it flow. Buy the book. Fix the pipe before it bursts. Take the course. Buy the good boots. Treat your partner to a dinner that makes them smile. Trust in your ability to generate, rather than just your ability to retain. The world does not reward the people who are the best at hiding. It rewards the people who are the best at living. Stop trying to save your way to a life you don't hate, and start investing your way to a life you love. The dam is breaking anyway. You might as well learn to swim in the river. It's time to stop counting the seeds, and time to start planting them.